Hello everyone, my name is Jake. Welcome back to the Federal Focus. And today we are going to be talking about how basically the parties became what they are. We're also talking about historical parties. Basically, we're going to be giving an overview of the political landscape in America and how this came to be. Now, I'm going to be basically talking about how we morphed into the two-party system with the Democrats and the Republicans. As you can see here, I'll be showing the prehistoric parties which had preceded this and how these parties merged, converged, diverged, and ultimately came together to form the two parties today. Um, Now this is going to be basically a history lesson for the last 250 years of American history. So let's get into it. So, start off, I'm going to be going with Democrats first before the Republicans here. Okay. Now we all know Democrats are the more left-wing party than the Republicans. Um, and this has come through many ways. So the earliest we can trace this here is through the Anti-Federalists. Now, let me just say this. Um, Back then, this was in the 1780s. This is basically, if you were an Anti-Federalist, you didn't want the Constitution to be ratified. If you were a Federalist, then you wanted to be ratified. This because they were more anti-centralization of the government. Um, and this was not really left or right wing. It says left in here, but it's more libertarian or less libertarian. Basically, these people wanted the Constitution not to be in effect. But of course, it went into effect, so it didn't really exist for that long, which morphed into the anti-administration party. It wasn't really a real party. It was just some of the policies of Hamilton they opposed. Um, this wasn't really a thing for long. But then we go into our first major party for the Democrats. This was a huge party. This is called the Democratic Republican Party. This party basically dominated politics from the 1790s to the 1824 election. From that point, if we ignore Washington because he was an independent, he did caucus usually with them. John Adams is the only president from that time to not be a member of this party. The reason why is because they were really popular. Sorry, John Adams, 1796, he was elected against Thomas Jefferson, who pretty famous person. Um, and then in 1800, Jefferson wins an absolutely nasty election, and then they win for the next couple times. And the opposition, which we'll talk about later, the Federalists kind of just morph out because no one really wants them anymore. We can see this. If I can go down here to electoral history, you can see how the amount of electoral votes they got here just keeps on going up. Um, so yeah, they were basically the dominant party at this time. Um, Now this party was wait a second. Now this party you can define as more left wing. They were more pro to France against the UK, which was a big issue at this time, not only because of the 1812 war, the War of 1812, but basically a second revolution for the US. However, once this was basically the Uni Party, and there was only one party because they controlled, as you can see here, 44 out of 48 Senate seats. That's when we start to see division in the party. Now, this basically starts in the 1824 election, where they decided, for whatever reason, to run four candidates. So we had four different Democratic Republicans here. And because no one got a majority, this went to the House to decide, and they ultimately decided that John Quincy Adams would be president, even though he had less electoral votes and less votes, which, as you can imagine, did not make Andrew Jackson very happy. He ended up splitting off from the party, and there basically became two different parties. It was the Jackson Party and the anti-Jackson Party. That's basically it. But the Jackson Party ended up winning in 1828, and he became president, and he was the first president for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has been around 200 years, and it actually started with Andrew Jackson, believe it or not. I cannot imagine he would be a Democrat today. Obviously, things have changed a lot. Let's keep in mind, it has become much more left wing now. Obviously, there's also been several other. Let's keep in mind that it doesn't just switch from the Democratic Republican Party to the Democrat Party. There's a lot of, or the Jackson Party to the Democrat Party. There's a lot of filtering of parties, if you know what I mean. For example, like three or more parties can combine. There was a lot of third parties at this time. So it's not just a straight to them, but it's basically the history of it. Um, Now from the 1820s, um, they competed with the Whigs parties from the 1820s to the 1850s. And we'll talk about the Whigs in just a second for a moment. And we can see their electoral. You can actually see that. But as you can see here, they have been around for a long, long time, 200 years. I believe they're one of the oldest political parties in the whole world, which is kind of crazy to think about. I mean, 1828 has basically been around for every single year but 30 years of the US. Moving on from them, we are going to the Republican Party. They've been around since 1854, which we'll get to know how. And you know how I was talking about the Anti-Federalists? Now we have the Federalists. Now, just imagine the Anti-Federalists basically flipped them on their head. These people wanted the Constitution to be ratified. They wanted a bigger government, unlike the Anti-Federalists, and they ultimately, obviously, got their way as we are under this beautiful Constitution of ours. And they were never really you can't really define them as a political party. I mean, you can. Keep in mind that unlike the modern day Democrat and Republican parties, all these other parties were a bigger tent of voters. They could be left or right wing, and they could just want a bigger government, and so they would be in the Federalist Party. The left and right wing also barely existed at the time, so it's kind of not a good way to put it. But as I said earlier, the Federalist Party never really got anywhere. Um, After the 1800 election, which John Adams lost, because of the popularity of the anti-federalist, later Democratic Republicans, they never really got anywhere, and so they ended up fizzling out. Um, and because of this, though, the Whig Party, which was basically the next continuation into the Republican Party, you can't really say that the Federalist Party is the predecessor of the Republican Party, but they are technically related. And so the Whig Party morphed out of basically the anti-Jackson Party and a bunch of other third parties. The Whig Party was basically created to be opposition to Andrew Jackson. They wanted a national bank. They basically wanted everything that he didn't want. And the Whig Party, unlike the earlier Democratic Republicans, or not the Democratic Republicans, the Federalist parties, they actually served as a real opposition. They won a couple of presidential elections. They had a couple of presidents from their party. As you can see here, they won two. But eventually they started splitting up, of course, because of the slavery issue, which I should have mentioned earlier. But the Whig parties were more anti-slavery than the Democrats, but they weren't really anti-slavery, and that made some people mad. And so the Whig Party ends up fizzling out mostly because of the slavery issue. Um, it was always going to be a difficult party to hold, but for multiple reasons, like I said, the slavery issue and the Compromise of 1850, which was the slavery issue. They ended up fizzling out into a bunch of parties. You have the Know Nothing parties, which were like an anti-immigrant party. But they also basically become the Republicans. You can't really say it was just straight like that, but they were the predecessor for the Republicans because Republicans obviously in the beginning, obviously were anti-slavery, unlike the Democrats at the time. And so the Whig Party kind of morphed into them, and they became more anti-slavery as they took more different people into their coalition. They also took the Free Soil Party, which helped with that. They were very anti-slavery, and so that leads to the Republican Party of today. And thank you everyone for listening. This is an interesting video to make. In my opinion, this is I feel like one of the most interesting topics here, but a lot of people don't really know about this, and so it's really why I'm making it. But thank you everyone for watching, and goodbye.